Hey, what's up guys? Rare Bishop here from the Press A to Listen podcast, and we have another video review for you. This time it's for the Amazing Spider-Man 2 video game. Obviously it's the video game based off of the movie of the same name, and for anyone who has played the original The Amazing Spider-Man, developed by Beenox, that came out a couple of years ago with the first movie, you will probably enjoy this one because it's very similar in the gameplay and combat and stuff like that, but with a few tweaks that Beenox implemented to try to make it a little better. Let's just get right into it. The first one is new web swinging. Instead of you, like in the first game, first Amazing Spider-Man, instead of you swinging to nothing in the sky and going across the city, now you have to be next to a building, or if you're in Central Park, next to the trees. Something has to be next to you for Spider-Man to be able to web swing. So, for example, if you're in the middle of a street, you hit left trigger to use your left arm, and he attaches to that building. You hit right trigger to go to the building on the right, he uses his right arm. So left trigger is left arm, right trigger is right arm, and that's how you web swing now. And when starting the game off and they introduce that new mechanic, it's very difficult to get a hang of it because it's so different from the last few Spider-Man games where you would hit left trigger or right trigger to web swing and he would just go. Now, if you're in the middle of an open area and there's no buildings or anything near you, you can't do that. You can't just web swing and hit imaginary things into the sky. So that does take some getting used to. But after, I'd say 30 minutes to an hour with the game and with that new mechanic, it starts to become natural, and you start to understand what they want you to do, how they want you to do it, and that becomes really easy to actually perform. Now, when it comes to the actual open world in itself, they tried to do a few different things when it comes to side missions and stuff like that. You still have the combat missions where you just beat up thugs. You still have the car chase missions where you try to rescue civilians. They have new missions where you go into hideouts, and that's where you unlock some of the new suits. You defeat 3 or 4 enemies in a hideout. You go up to the suit, it unlocks, and you can use that suit from there on forth. They also have missions where you rescue civilians from a burning building. So it takes back into that Spider-Man personality where he's always all about rescuing people. He can't just leave someone there. So they tried that stuff, but unfortunately those side missions themselves are just not fun to actually complete and to do. Some of those missions, like the saving civilians from a burning building, it's the same 3 or 4 buildings every time you do it. So it just becomes so boring and monotonous to do because it's just the layout of the building, where the civilians are. They don't change any of that stuff up. And none of these, since they're side missions, they don't add anything of value to the actual gameplay. They don't add anything of value to the actual story, because the story is only 14 missions long and you can complete in maybe 3 or 4 hours. So these side missions are obviously just here to add some longevity to the game, but if you're going to do that, you want to make sure you put in side missions that are actually fun to complete. Also, the open world it has a good chunk of taxis and buses and cars, but the people on the street, with it supposed to be a simulating New York, there's maybe at a time 10, maybe if you're lucky on some streets 15 people. You go into the simulated Times Square in the game, and there's just nobody there. And for it to be New York City, and especially for this to be on Xbox One and PS4 now, you would expect those versions to maybe have a few more people, a few more cars on screen at once. And granted, I know it's a movie tie-in. Their budget is not as huge as certain other superhero games like Batman from Rocksteady, but I expected a little bit more with it being even more expensive than with these versions, Xbox One and PS4 being more expensive than the 360 and PS3 versions. If you want people to get those new versions and experience the next gen Spider-Man game, you got to make sure it feels next gen, and it just, unfortunately, with the visuals and with the open worldness, it does not feel that way. Getting to the core gameplay of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, the combat is very similar to past Beenox Spider-Man games, and in that case, it's also very similar to the Arkham Batman games, where you hit X to defeat enemies, you hit a thing will come over their head to let you know when to counter, and you can do all that. Unfortunately, it's just not as fun to use that combat in a Spider-Man game than it is to a Batman game. In these types of games, it just turns into more button mashing than anything. There's no actual strategy to the combat, and therefore it turns into you just spamming the X button as many times as you can, and then trying to move on. They try to mix that up a little bit later on in the story with these missions that don't really require you, but they encourage you to do more stealth takedowns. Some, move a little slower with Spider-Man, and that actually ends up being the most fun of the game, is because they mix it up and try to take it back a little bit and try to make sure you think about things. You just don't go in guns blazing, because of course you don't have no guns, but more web blazing, because if they see you, or if they see too much of you, their awareness level will go up and you'll have to replay the mission. So those are the most fun missions in the game, because it doesn't require you to just spam the X button with their tedious combat. Now, when it comes to the actual story, I mentioned earlier that there are only 14 main story missions in the game that take you about 3 to 4 hours roughly to complete. And for those that are concerned about the movie being spoiled or anything like that, you don't have to worry about that at all, because the game itself does not use the same storyline as the movie. There are characters from the movie in this game, but they don't have the same actual storyline or anything like that. And in turn, they don't have the same voice actors. So Andrew Garfield, who plays Spider-Man, is not in the game. Jamie Foxx is not in the game. Those characters, like I mentioned, are in the game, but those voice actors and even their likenesses are not. They have different voice actors and different likenesses for those specific characters. And Beenox does a good job of giving fan service, with numerous characters. Kraven's in the game, Kingpin's in the game. So if more than likely, if you have a favorite villain, that character is probably going to be in the Amazing Spider-Man 2. So they do a very good job of that. Now, moving on from that to Peter Parker, the other side of Spider-Man, they introduce him into this game a whole lot more. You see him a whole lot more. So you don't go around beating up enemies or web slinging as Peter Parker, obviously, but they introduce him to the story more, and it's kind of cool how they do it. Granted, like I said previously, you don't see Andrew Garfield's character because it's a totally different actor in the video game. But there are a couple of occasions where you need to eavesdrop on enemies, or you need to go over here to transform and change into Spider-Man. So they kind of mixed up a little bit. Maybe 2 or 3 missions where you play as Peter Parker for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. So it's not a huge part of the story, but them throwing that in there gives you a little bit of variety, something a little bit different, and it's not something that I think most people expected with this game. They didn't expect to play as Peter Parker. They just expected the whole game to be you playing as Spider-Man. Now, getting back to gameplay for a minute or two, there is morality levels in this game. There are the hero side, and there is a menace side. It's very similar to what they have in like the Infamous games, but at the same time, it's also not. It's only similar in the fact that there's a good and the evil side. But you do not go on the evil side from killing civilians or from blowing stuff up. The only way you go to the menace side is by failing side missions, or the story mode will put you over on that side sometimes. So it's very easy to go to the hero side, because you complete any side missions, you complete any story missions, you automatically go over there. So again, they try to throw something new in there, but they don't fully flesh it out enough for it to be of any significance. The one thing with the gameplay they actually did seem like they fleshed out was the upgrade system. You have upgrades for your web shoot, for your spider sense, which is similar to how the Batman vision is in the Arkham games, web rush, web pull, web boost, and stuff like that. Each of those categories have 3 separate upgrades, and you get the points to upgrade them by doing the side missions. So it might give you a little bit of incentive to do the side missions, but you don't have to do all of them. That's not required or anything to get all these upgrades. And these upgrades themselves, they'll make it to where you can jam a weapon when you pull a weapon out, pull a weapon from an enemy's hand. It makes the web pull faster. The web boost will make you boost faster. It'll make you slingshot. So they added a little bit of stuff to the upgrade system that turns Spider-Man into a little bit more of a threat to enemies. Because when you first start out, it's just you spamming the X button a little bit. Now you can go in there with the upgrades. You can web shoot to try to slow them down. You can pull the weapons from their hands and stuff like that. And with that upgrade system, there are different suits. So each suit has its own level. There are, I think, 10 to 12 suits in the game. Each of them have their own level. And when you go up a level in the game, your Spider-Man does more damage, or he takes less damage, or his health goes up, or stuff like that. So with the upgrade system and the actual suits, they fleshed that out enough to where that seems actually, it's a pretty cool system, and it makes each of those categories more fun to use than it was at the beginning of the game. So to wrap this review up, the side missions themselves, not necessarily fun to complete. The variety in them is not enough. The open world itself is not populated enough, and the game itself just does not look spectacular. And you add in the draw distance, which I forgot to mention earlier. When you're web swinging, sometimes the city will just pop in. So you have pop in, you have the draw distance problem. It makes the graphics and the visual fidelity not so great when compared to other open world games on past systems, much less on an Xbox One or PS4. But they do a good job with the upgrades. They do a good job with the suits and the fact that they each have their own levels. Another downside, though, is the missions aren't very long. It takes, like I said, 3 to 4 hours to complete. So for $60 on, or you can get it for $50 in some places for the Xbox One and PS4 versions, it's really hard to recommend. If you're a diehard Spider-Man fan, obviously you've already picked it up and you already enjoy it. But if you're on the fence and just want something to play, because especially on these new systems that don't have a ton of games to play at the moment, you're better off waiting until May when Wolfenstein and Watch Dogs come out. Because right now Spider-Man is not worth $60. At 40, I could probably, or 30, I could probably recommend it. But at 60, I unfortunately just cannot. So I hope you enjoyed the video review. Leave some kindly comments below of any constructive criticism, and thanks for watching.